Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to another adventure into reality. Today we're going to be exploring the weather, multidimensional weather, hurricanes, past, present, and future. Many of you are experiencing Hurricane Harvey now. Throughout the world, we are seeing the news being consumed by the aftermath of a hurricane, with another Hurricane Irma threatening to go to the northern United States and possibly Mexico. I am joined today by Andre Hodge. We are going to be exploring the science, metascience, and metaphysics of hurricanes. Andre, welcome to the show. You've been on so many times, it's like having somebody that knows the material back and forth.
Yeah, mate. Thank you for having me, and very interesting topic to have a opportunity to have a chat about. Um, there's a lot going on. There has been a lot going on, and you, with your perceptions of these sort of events, will, I know, give people a lot more context of the layers that are going on and the potentials and the benefits and all those sort of things. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So just for people to know, Andre was my first producer on Adventures into Reality back in 2013. He was there. We went from just a handful of callers to thousands of callers. So Andre has been familiar with the material, and we were having a private conversation, and I was just talking with him about the hurricanes and the storms, and there was this incredible flow that was coming through, and things that had been building in my own life since the eclipse that happened on the 21st of August. Now we're here to the next level where these storms are more than just physical storms that we see in the 3D matrix. Harvey went straight to the center of karmic resolution, the Gulf oil producing areas, Texas, the heart of the infrastructure of the military industrial complex, hundreds of military bases above and below also threatened, as well as the naval forces that are there, the oil industry, natural gas industry that's there, the port industries that are there. This was not weather warfare. I have stated on only a handful of times the majority of weather warfare systems are no longer functioning the way they were in the last 2 years. The system of weather is now at a point, the more electromagnetic frequency they put into it, or HARP or weather altering frequencies, they discover their greater algorithms of weather control completely crumble. So it is a point where they must give energy to the system to create its remedy, resolve, and resolution. These storms are karmic, resolution, and time rift-based concepts. In the center of these storms is a low-pressure system. Shortly, we're going to be exploring the science and the meta-science behind them. But from this point of view, on observing a storm that is a seen and an unseen storm, we are seeing great energies stirred up before the storm's arrival, during the storm, and then after the storm pulls out. During Hurricane Sandy and Katrina, many of the sacred geometry systems were underwater, and the people fled the area, a full-on exodus. And as long as they were underwater and there were no people there for them to haunt, many of these sacred objects and sacred geometry machines, buildings, courthouses, monuments, and etc. lost their abilities to stay grounded, and many of the ghosts and negative entities that were bound to them found their way to go somewhere else because there was nothing for them to feed on in that area. Or the sacred geometry systems themselves fell apart because there wasn't a wizard class left to support them. All of these sacred geometry systems require us and our input, our daily, our cars, our parking, our going and paying of taxes for them to stay bound there. This next hurricane that is coming, Irma, has a variety of potentials when it's coming for the karmic resolution. It is coming for where it's creating the most amount of karmic debt. Hurricane Harvey went straight into the city of Houston. That was where the most karmic debt and resolution was needed. So Andre, let's talk some of the normal science that is around hurricanes.
Yeah, well, in a bit of prep to this conversation that I'm having with Andrew, we looked at a few videos and you actually gave me some good links. And the way sort of hurricanes originate and the areas of the world offer patterns. And it's not only the world on Earth that we're aware of it. I feel, Andrew, that from what you've offered me, there's a greater unawareness related to the solar system, the planets, and probably the sun and our galaxy sort of location as well. But from the basic point of view, the sort of the hurricanes that travel from east to west into the Gulf of Mexico and up the east coast of the USA. From what I see, they sort of brew over Africa, and then they proceed from central sort of Africa, from the Indian Ocean sort of area, across the continent, and then travel across the Atlantic Ocean over to the US. So is there something going on related to that birthing of these sort of storms?
Yes. So it starts over the Kenya, Sudan, Egypt, and then goes over the Sahara. That's the most important thing to understand. It is going over the hot Sahara. Very dry, hot winds that suddenly go over the oceans, which are also very warm. So immediately that picks up the moisture off the water. And since there's very few trees and stuff to block this wind as it goes over the Sahara Desert, it has created a perfect line of circular storm creation. So it's also just above and below the equator line too. So you have, majority of these hurricanes are only created on the equator. That's where the Coriolis effect that's creates the rotation of the storm, which then ultimately creates the eye. And as the water is rapidly evaporated, it goes up very fast. And when it reaches the outer atmosphere and there's no pressure above it, it'll create a downward action. And it's continuous, like a vortex. That is the science right now that is behind, how these superstorms are formed. It's how fast they can convert surface ocean water into moisture that creates clouds, that creates thunderheads, and so on.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously you mentioned the equator region of the world, which it's related to the heating of the water. So is there any relationship with the sun? Obviously with...
Yes.
Yeah.
So on the more metaphysical side, each hurricane is a karmic resolution process, a time paradox resolution process. The Sahara Desert itself experienced multiple reality-altering destructions over many millions of years, as well as the esoteric science that's behind, the African continents. Esoteric science is meaning it's a designed and created land after great weapons of mass destruction were there. New life ecosystems are grafted on top of it. So there is a continental resolution, from hundreds of thousands of years ago. And then there's the living beings that are on it now, the karma that they are creating. So all across Africa and the Sahara, all of a sudden it goes over to open ocean, and it changes from one community style to another. And there's 3,000 or 4,000 miles before it hits the Leeward Islands, and the outermost Leeward Island is Barbados, St. Thomas, St. Croix, so on and so forth, Trinidad and Tobago. Those outward Leeward Islands are the ones that take the first brunt of the storm, and that's where it goes from ocean-based karmic resolution back to land-based karmic resolution. All the time, it is also resolving time-based issues in those observed and unobserved, living and non-living areas. The ocean itself has thousands of life forms in it that are also affected by these hurricanes. Again, on the more metaphysical side, these hurricanes create rifts in time. And one of the things that I was saying to Andre privately before is many of these rifts are now reseeding the oceans with sea life that hasn't been in our waters for thousands or millions of years. This is, again, karmic resolution and balance for those that weren't able to leapfrog in time the way we are leapfrogging through time as consciousnesses in levels of awareness.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and just by listening to you explain that, I know one big concept that you brought to me is the womb chakras of Earth, and the 2 to 300 depending on where Earth is at and the state of our relationship with it.
Yes.
And obviously, to me, I've gone through a lot of your recordings, and I've heard a common theme with that is that a great proportion of them are actually around the equator regions. So
2/3 of them are all around the equator regions, like bunches of grapes.
yeah. So the life, you've always said that Earth is a seventh dimensional seed planet from its core.
Inception.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and the womb chakras are the births, or the regions
Yep.
where life is birthed. And when I heard you say they're potentially time storms as well, which are creating rifts that allow for um, life that may have been or may exist millions of years ago to have an avenue to get to here now, or a shorter volume of time if you want. But I found that really fascinating.
Well, we're in a time where remedy and resolve and resolution is the process, not a justice and judgment. Since the very first day I've come out, I've talked about separation of densities. And these storms are the collective and the uncollective at the tug of war of awareness, how our global narrative is actually affected. So there has been variety of things that have gone on since 2012 to now that everyone thought it was going to happen tomorrow and nothing happened. The only thing that has any sway over the global narratives are great natural disasters and hurricanes. Earthquakes and hurricanes and volcanoes. Those are the only things that have any control over the global narrative. And it is my point of view that these set of hurricanes are here to alter the unseen side of the global narrative. They're going to resolve great parts of the karmic debt that's been created by ancient lineages and passed down to the future lineages who have no idea or hope of being able to reduce or let this go because they no longer have the esoteric science, basic knowledge, or knowingness of how to convert or alchemize these projected energies that are stored in our systems.
Mm, mm. So I just gave you an opportunity to give you an overview of the Mexican Gulf region, but there's other areas of the world also that have these instances of weather um, phenomena, such as Asia,
Yep.
northeast of Australia, over to Europe as well. But I don't sense there's as much there. Um, is there
Well,
any?
hurricanes only happen right around the equator line, just above and below the equator line. It's very difficult for them to go above that. Though you have times hurricanes form out over the Atlantic, go over the East Coast, and then head back towards England, which has happened the last couple of years, as well as the West Coast. There have been typhoons that have gone through the Philippines and Japan and then went across the Pacific and then came into the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, so on and so forth. So it follows the jet stream. It all depends on how the jet stream is pushing these storms.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, there's one other thing that which I've felt for a while, which you sort of really brought up with me, was that um, the relationship to our consciousness and the weather. Um,
Yes,
with
the collect and the uncollective.
yeah,
So we have heard over the last many years weather control, mind control. Mind control and weather control are one and the same thing. The whole world is what I believe it's like 68% water, the surface of the world.
mm,
That's all programmable water. That's all a part of our consciousness and awareness and on the surface and just below the subsurface. Now that programmable water is constantly evaporating, turning to rain, turning to snow, collecting solubles and raining back down. It is an ever-present system. And that is what maintains our reality, this programmed water, as well as the consciousness that's around it. Now when these storms form, consciousness collects into it. So it does not matter if you're in China or in the Pacific Northwest and the storm is in the Caribbean, there's still an aspect of your programming into the water, into the oxygen of this world. You are a part of it. All of that water has sunlight on it, the same sunlight that all the plants of the world use photosynthesis to create with. And all the great food chain of life that feeds in the ocean, the algae that's fed upon there too, or the krill, so on and so forth. They're all supported by the sun. And the sun is the major driver towards how these consciousness storms or maelstroms are created. It is fair to say that in our history right now, post 2012, we're in the times of what I'll just call confusion, where people are trying to figure out the difference between what is up and what is down and what is inside and what's out, because we live in an upside down and inside out world.
Mm, mm. Yeah, one of the video series I've done with you is about the industrial age, and we're at the end of the implementation of that. We're in the technical age, and there is from what I perceive in the reality, there's a necessity for us to be disconnected from things like the earth and the environment and the weather. Um, but what what I got from the chat I had with you leading up to this recording was how the weather is actually an enormous ally to us, and there's certain things and aspects which you got into by offering the metaphysical aspects that suggested that there was good things happening relative to this. Do you want to share something on that, Andrew?
So yes, there is since these are karmic resolution storms, and wherever they go, there's the most amount of karmic resolution. So in Hurricane Irma's example, it is just off the coast of Africa, and more than likely by Wednesday next week, so the 7th to the 6th of November, possibly by the 11th of November, hitting parts of the United States,
September?
Mexico,
September?
Gulf
September.
of September. Yes, September.
Yeah.
So between September 5th and the 11th, there is a high potential of it going towards Mexico or the United States. Now, part of my point of view is if they're going to use any continuing full-on control, weather control, to alter something, and it does go south to Mexico, that means the esoteric battle of the surface and the subsurface is still going on, and that these storms are going to get worse and worse and worse. The more weather control energy they put in, the more negative effects they have, 7 to 10-fold in their other areas that are affected, because what is resolving in these storms is also time traveling. And those entities that have been on the surface of the world, disincarnates trapped in the sacred geometry system, or those willingly wanting to be in the sacred geometry system, the subculture of etheric entities that are connected to the sacred geometry systems for tens of thousands or millions of years, those systems will be severely damaged, and they won't be able to stay within those systems, and these storms will essentially force them to go to their astral worlds and find resolution and no longer be bound to our physical world. And if we could have a 30 to 50% reduction in stored entities within the system, we could see a potential of much better outcomes to certain processes when you'd have that many less predatory feeding entities.
Yeah, what I get from that is basically you're talking about ghosts and demons that occupy certain regions of the earth, and we have a relationship with them.
As well as disincarnate off-worlders, yes. So there are off-worlders that do not need physical bodies. They've reached a level of technology where they can manifest and unmanifest light-based bodies at will.
Yeah. I've actually made a recording that hasn't been public yet with Andrew about hauntings, ghosts, and the sacred geometry infrastructure that support that aspect of our world that we live in. And basically a lot of the courts and these sort of buildings and the criminal element in society is all there just to feed the ghosts and demons and these disincarnated beings that Andrew are talking about. And they're in all our cities. There's cultures with them. You've talked about places like New York that have whole societies related to all this, and they're pretty much everywhere in all the main cities to keep this
worldwide.
Yeah, to keep I would say the frequency of the earth in that region in a sort of manageable way for the system of domination control. So
Right.
what I was going to offer you, Andrew, and I got from that was um, there is these sort of massive storms have a huge water deluge raining sort of component, and from what I gather with you is that there's an enormous metaphysical benefit from a huge drowning of a region. Is that something
Correct.
you can go on?
Yes. So when you have a flooding of an area, the people must leave. When the people leave, those that are bound to the courthouses, the sacred geometry buildings, parks, memorials, streets that have are interwoven into laws that have, long-reaching effect into soul family, because each and every law does affect a living soul, and part of the esoteric system is to print a soul so the physical laws affect it from lifetime to lifetime, like thus the debt, so on and so forth. When you can't maintain the court system, you can't maintain the post office for long periods of time, like 5-6 weeks, they break down tremendously, and those entities can no longer stay bound in their systems. The systems don't have enough energy to keep a bubble, and their whole little false astral societies, literally, the house of cards come tumbling down, and every night there's far less light energy for them to source on, and they lose energy and are unable to stay phased into our reality, and they simply phase out of the reality and return to their natural astral matrix instead of faking it like they've been doing it for so long. Now, conversely, there is a physical side that supports that, a wizard class. Now, that wizard class, in one of the recordings I've talked about, they were overtaken by the technological age. The technological age is barely 100 years old. It really wasn't until the 1950s and 60s that most people got color and television and transistor radios. And, 30 years later, you had basic internet. And 20 years after that, total 50 years later, we have where we're at right now. So we're talking 50 years. It's only been 50 years, and really only 10 years since high technology has been in, 2/3 of the world, of the world's major cities.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
the wizard class is no longer educated in the same way to support the old infrastructure. Digitality has taken over the main system, but the digital system is still fed by the local courthouses. If you take, I believe there's 500,000 court cases every day across just the United States alone. That's in totality. There's 5,300 counties, and each county can have one courthouse and 20 judges, to 10 to 20 judges there. And in some of the big cities, 1,000 judges, 1,500 judges. Plus mayor's court, so on and so forth.
Yeah, you say that the head of the Supreme Court are, and I would say with the judges, now that you've offered that, they're responsible for the dream time of the domination control. That's
correct. They're also what we'll just say the head of the new harvester class.
Yes.
Every court case is supported by the Babylonian money curse. And if you look at American courts, you have an angel with a blindfold called justice. There is no justice or judgment in remedy and resolve. And it is an esoteric symbology of why the scales are weighed against the just and the unjust. Because it isn't a fair system, and that's what it's saying right up front. As soon as you've engaged in the courts, you've already lost the energy battle and the physical battle.
Yes.
That is why whatever is done at the administrative level or the spiritual administrative level. That's why I've come up with the banking and the government revocations. When one understands the perspective and what others' perspectives, projections on you are, as well as the mythos behind it, is where you can deconstruct their mythos by creating your own rules, borders, and spiritual policies that prevent them from entangling and exchanging energy with you. That's the basis of this, why the court system and the judges are at the peak of the esoteric alchemy side. Now, not all judges are wizards, and that is a broad statement, but that high level, at the Scalia level before he died, the Supreme Court and the top federal judges, they are the dark wizards. Are
Yes.
they dark wizards via practitioners? Not always. A handful of them are. And the rest of them, at some point, have been overtaken by the mm, lure of power and the government and money, and have repeated that lifetime to lifetime to lifetime and become powerful tools to the system itself, contract holders to the great machine that is retaining negative soul frequencies on a surface world,
Yeah.
with all the esoteric practice and ancient history behind it.
Mm. Yeah, they've given their sovereignty away to the structure.
Correct.
Yeah. Because, like, you sign laws, you agree to contracts, or you become an employee of something, then essentially you're giving your sovereignty away in certain degrees and stuff like that. So,
Right.
yeah, the 1990s video series I've done with Andrew, the first one of that, he gets into basically, as a product of the technological era, the escalation of the lawyer class was a byproduct of that. So that's something to keep in mind if you're wanting to do more research.
Yeah.
But what you
Well,
what go on? Sorry.
what we'll do is we'll put some links at the description of the video. So for those that want to go and watch it, we'll put those in, and where some of the suggested titles to start with. You know, Andre, this has been a special opportunity. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this part one. We know, because we know a lot of you don't have time to hook around for 2 hours. So we're going to wrap this up. And what we're going to talk about this last part is, now that this knowledge is coming to you, it's what to do with it. We do not want to sell fear. The storm is going to be the storm, just like Harvey was a storm, just like Hurricane Katrina, so on and so forth. Here is now where awareness, it's a collective and an uncollective tug of war. This is where you can go to the eye of the metaphorical storm, or the eye of the physical storm, with your own mind, go online and find pictures and videos of it, and direct your consciousness, your collective mind, to resolve your karma. Because no matter where you are in the world, that is an object of karmic resolution. And within the center of the eye is all of the things that are trying to come together as a collective. And all those things that don't want it to come into a collective are trying to counter that process. So here is where you can put your positive prayer, your positive affirmation, and begin your first mission at being your own civilization of one who's going to say, through my point of personal unity, my point of the sacred neutral view, I am here to add to the collective of karmic resolution for the greater awakening of mankind and the shedding off of domination and control.